I am sitting in a busy cafe on a cobbled street in Lviv. It is a Wednesday morning, and the gentle summer breeze is quietly rustling the leaves above on the large oak trees gathered around me. The waiter brings out my matcha tonic in a massive glass cup, warning me to be careful with it as I lean on my wobbly table so that the drink doesn't spill. As I take my first sip, I see a tall and slender woman with a familiar smile approach from the street behind me. That woman is my friend Sasha Dovzhyk. I met Sasha in the first year of the full-scale invasion in London. She had spent years in the same city as me, but our paths only crossed when Russia decided to invade the country we both called home. At first, we met online, through the podcast that you're listening to right now. In one of our first episodes ever, Maksym interviewed Sasha without me, as I lay sick and feverish in my bed, listening to them speak. But then our friendship developed into one that wasn't confined to the internet. We would meet in person in London, sometimes in Kyiv, to talk about books and writing, life and war, and the feeling of always being in between. But since then, life had changed, and I was meeting Sasha in a place she now called home, eager to hear more about how her life had changed 3 years after we first met. She was now heading up a groundbreaking institute helping document the war in Ukraine. And as we sat there chatting, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to have met so many incredible people, including Sasha, in such dark times.
This is a new season of Ukrainian Spaces, a collaboration with Ukrainska Pravda, a podcast elevating diverse Ukrainian voices and explaining Ukraine to the world. This season, we're reconnecting with our guests from our launch season 2022. 3 years ago, they inspired our audience not only to stand with Ukraine, but also to join us on the powerful journey of reconnecting with our true selves. They helped us to understand why authenticity, dignity, and diversity always trump tyranny, fear, and despair. Now we want to check on these remarkable Ukrainians and see where this resistance has carried them today.
Hi, this is Alina Polyakova, managing editor of the English edition of Ukrainska Pravda. This season of Ukrainian Spaces is produced in partnership with us and hosted by Valeria Wachevska and Maksym Val, whom you just heard. We are glad to bring you these stories of change from the guests of Ukrainian Spaces and proud to support the project as one of Ukrainians' most trusted voices for truth and freedom. If you'd like to support our work, you can make a quick donation through our website or join our Patreon community. All the links are right there in the episode description.
Could I please start with saying how honored I feel to be back and how happy I am to hear your voices, Val, Maksym, and how sad I am that we are recording this episode 3 years into the full-scale invasion. I've also listened back to the conversation we had with Maksym in March 2022, and it was very special for me too. I think I was very high on adrenaline and COVID and early days of the full-scale invasion, full-on survival mode. And I would not have believed myself if I told myself back then 3 years later, we would still be fighting the same enemy. But we are still here. This is the good news. I'm Sasha Dovzhyk. I was born in Zaporizhia in the southeast of Ukraine in 1988, a couple of years after Chernobyl and a couple of years before the declaration of Ukrainian independence, which I think are 2 milestones in the independent Ukraine's history. And there was sort of a journey from Zaporizhia to Kyiv and from Kyiv to London, where I did my PhD, where I worked at the Ukrainian Institute London and taught at several universities, comparative literature, English literature, all sorts of literature, finally Ukrainian literature when the world became interested in that one as well. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I came back to Ukraine, first worked here as a local producer, and then started searching for other ways to be useful. And since 2023, since late 2023, I am back permanently. I'm based in Lviv, which is Western Ukraine. And I currently lead a new cultural and research institution, which is called INDEX, Institute for Documentation and Exchange. And its work basically concentrates on the documentation of wartime experiences. And we are trying to do this work in international intellectual exchange so that people from other parts of the country, other parts of Ukraine that are closer to the front line, that are more endangered, come here, stay with us, work on their important individual projects, and they do it in communication with their peers from abroad who get a chance to also document our wartime experiences, but do it in a grounded and contextualized manner so that we eventually can recognize ourselves in the projects that they produce.
For me personally, it's one of those testaments to Ukrainian resilience, because when we talked back in March 2022, we probably had quite clear, well, at least you definitely had a quite clear understanding what is happening, what is going on, but we were all lacking this vision of what to do next. And you're one of those people who actually mobilized and created something that not only responds or echoes your values, but is very practical and something that really helps to not only make sense, but ensure there's justice in the future. So before we go to that, I actually wanted to talk to you about massive life change that you went through since then. When we talked 3 years ago, you were talking to me from London, and you spent nearly a decade there. You worked in academia and cultural institutions. And then since then, you returned back to Ukraine, to the epicenter of everything that is happening, and you built your life there. So I wanted to ask you, when did that happen, and why you decided that this is the place for you to be after spending so much time abroad and building your life abroad? So what happened there?
It was a change in the making. And since then, I've done a couple of backs and forths. My passport became somewhat of a novel in stamps. You know, when you cross the border between Ukraine and the European Union, they stamp your passport with the date of your arrival and your departure. So it becomes a mosaic. It becomes a mosaic which tells you the story of your journeys. And I sort of tried to move between Ukraine and London for a year. I taught for a year full-time at one of London's colleges. Okay, we can name it. I taught at University College London. It was a valuable experience. I tried to infect London students with my love for Ukrainian literature and Ukrainian culture. I think I have largely succeeded. But between lectures, between seminars and other engagements, whenever I had a 4 days break, I took a flight, a train, and made this journey to Ukraine. I couldn't stay away for long. And at some point, I had this hard talk with myself when I asked myself questions why I was doing this to my soul and body. And the response was quite obvious to me. I had to just move back to Ukraine full time and work inside the country on the ground and participate in the this labor of love that keeps our country afloat, and do it full time. And this is what I did. And then various opportunities presented themselves, and one of them was to found this institution that I currently head.
You know, I actually think I wasn't there interviewing you in that second episode. I think Maksym did it without me. Maksym, am I correct?
Yes, It was second episode of the first season, and you couldn't make it because I think you felt unwell.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is because actually Sasha for me became sort of part of my own journey of discovering how I felt and understood what was happening back home in Ukraine, because we met in London. I still live in London, and I remember reaching out to Sasha online and saying, let's meet up and let's talk and let's sort of come together as Ukrainians in this foreign land to talk a little bit about what it feels like to live and to be in a place that is very different from what everyone at home is experiencing at the moment. So thank you for being there for me in that way, and for all the continuous conversations that we've had about writing, about various different things over the years. But I think what to me is really, really impressive and interesting about the work that you are doing, and actually, if we go back to one of the quotes from season 1, from that episode we are talking about, is that you always thought that the answers to a lot of questions, both about what is happening in Ukraine, but also what is happening in the world, do lie within Ukraine. And what you're doing now as part of Index, leading Index, is actually exactly that. It is trying to document Ukraine from within Ukraine. So I feel like it really, really summarizes the quote that you said in 2022, really summarizes the path that you chose after that.
We hope to show to the world that the key to solving world's most urgent issues lies within Ukraine, whether it is environmental issues or disinformation or modern warfare. In all of these spheres, Ukraine has amassed certain experience through crises like the Chernobyl catastrophe when it comes to the environment, or the ongoing war with Russia, which actually started 8 years ago, more than 8 years ago. Or disinformation campaigns. Well, we had the experience of being attacked by Russian trolls, and they sort of started their international campaign with Ukraine. So we've amassed that experience, and we've also amassed strategies of resistance that I hope the world would be interested in learning. But the project is supposed to be taking place while the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine has started. And all of these crises, all of these different experiences are as acute as they have ever been. And it is quite obvious to everyone now, I think, that whether it is environment or war or disinformation, it is indeed Ukraine that has answers to all these questions. And it is the support of our victory in our struggle against this massive neo-imperialist invasion that will eventually solve these problems.
You are also, apart from leading Index, developing your own book, which is based on testimonies that you've collected over the years or heard over the years, that you've written into the form of modern fairy tales. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more why you decided to do that and what guided you in sort of your quest to understand and hear more of what was happening in Ukraine.
I think I'm a very narrow-minded person because there is one grand idea and I stick to it. I still believe every word of what I said in 2022. It all rings true to me. Perhaps one thing that I would not correct, but slightly revise is that Ukraine probably doesn't have answers to all of world's questions. But we are the first ones to face those questions on the ground, and the strategies of resistance that are being worked out here will be of use to humanity. And the sooner humanity understands that, the better for its own sake. Yeah, that being said, I think that this formula, this approach, this framework that guides my work in the world of, institution building or teaching or academia also guides my creative writing. I believe that not the material, the life, the reality that we face here in Ukraine is very powerful on the one hand. On the other hand, all the testimonies I collect, all the stories I'm exposed to, all the stories people trust me with, also deserve to be told in such a way that they speak to humanity at large. And I also believe that there are various ways of doing that. One of them is sort of more conservative in a way, and we are more used to it. And it's the documentary writing, memoristic prose, some kind of diary that is being translated into languages and travels. But there is a danger in this kind of writing where we present Ukrainian experiences as this raw material upon which later others can throw their interpretations. It's a material to be sort of handled by people with time and space and resources to later be creative with it or be intellectual with it or like impose some kind of interpretation upon it. And I believe that there can be another way of working with these experiences, with these stories, and that we can also try to propose these frameworks of interpretation ourselves. And this is what I'm trying to do with my writing. I'm trying to find these universal is such a compromised word, but for the lack of another, these broadly recognizable patterns, tropes, archetypes from fairy tale and myth, that I sort of recognize in Ukrainian reality on the ground.
I think, from what you just said and from everything I've heard before about this amazing project that you're doing, I think it just once again goes to show, as you said, that, Ukrainians aren't just here to collect the raw material, but there's such creativity and agency that allows us to tell our story the way that we want it to be told, which I think is also why Maksym and I have been doing this podcast for such a long time, because we still do, 3 years and a bit later, believe in the fact that Ukrainians are so talented and should be empowered to tell their own story through their own words, through their own interpretations, and through their own journey. So thank you so much for telling us about this new project.
And I'm hearing from hearing what you're saying, and here's another quote of you that I want to share because it speaks right directly to what you just said.
I think it ties nicely to this idea that Ukraine would be defeated in 3 days that was bought by most of the Western media who kept being surprised by our resistance and with our fight. Well, it's basically because of the acceptance of Russian misrepresentation of Ukraine as somehow lacking in agency, lacking in subjectivity. So I think the problem lies with the acceptance of the Russian misrepresentation of Ukraine as a political non-entity, as a nation that lacks subjectivity, lacks agency, and is somehow culturally insignificant. This is obviously supported by the Russian money and the imperial cultural dominance of Russia in the international cultural space. And I think that nowadays it is also exemplified by the resistance that Western cultural institutions are putting up against the demand to cancel, so to speak, Russian culture. To boycott Russian culture, not to invite Russian artists and Russian public intellectuals to some kind of reconciliatory roundtables with Ukrainians, while Ukrainians are being slaughtered, literally, by the Russian army. It's very important for us now to decenter this view of Eastern Europe and to counter the Russocentric view of our region with the more diverse, more polyphonic conception.
So you were definitely sharing some frustration about how, at the time, Ukraine was viewed, not only in media, not only in news coverage, but also largely speaking. And you took that frustration and then you created the build up the institution back in Ukraine on the ground during war. And for so many probably foreigners listening to us, it might sound a bit counterintuitive that in a way for you to deal with this the largest genocide in Ukraine since 1930s, and you go back to the war zone and you build an institution that documents it. I wanted to ask you how that decision actually shaped or reshaped your daily work and your daily commitment to basically the same values that you shared 3 years ago. Did actually doing that in practice changed your outlook on what could be done to return that agency back to Ukraine and return that agency back to Ukrainian voices? Or you're basically still is super sure that that's the only way to go and this is the right strategy?
I'm sure it's not the only way to go, but this is definitely my way. I'll try to explain why building an institution has become a response for me that was adequate to the situation. The thing is, Ukraine and Ukrainians we live with this history of institutional erasure. I don't have to explain it to you, but maybe to our listeners who are not so steeped in Ukrainian history. We've been suffered from this imperialist erasure of Ukrainian culture makers and also of the infrastructure that keeps them afloat, and also of the heritage that keeps the record of their work for centuries by our unfortunate neighbor, Russian Empire, and currently Russian Federation. And it means that there are gaps in our cultural history, in our political history, that each generation of Ukrainians have to fill anew. And this is hard work. Ukrainians are talented, and there is always this sparkle of wonder, sparkle of surprise in their work, that they always manage to somehow rise from ash and create something extraordinary. But it would be so much easier, wouldn't it, if there were institutions that were allowed, that sort of fought for the space for themselves to enable Ukrainian talent to flourish. And I think that this is what motivates the work of Index. We want to support these Ukrainian voices of Ukrainian culture makers and practitioners, to reflect on their own experiences, to capture them, to save them, to preserve them for history. And we also want to empower our allies from abroad, our partners, our colleagues, who understand that they need to produce the knowledge of this war in close contact with Ukrainian reality. And they can come into the country, and they can be put in touch with our expert community, with people working here on the ground. They can receive our feedback. They can participate in peer review sessions. They can participate in institutional visits. We will be working tirelessly. We will be working hard so that the work that they produce does justice to Ukrainian experiences and to Ukrainian reality. And in the end, it's not an immediate result that we are seeking, but rather justice in this lasting and impactful form, justice that will unfold on the pages of textbooks and on the screens when we watch films about Ukraine and Ukrainian resistance, and in your opera houses, and in all the institutions of high culture, which finally recognizes that history of this war that currently affects not only Ukraine, obviously, but the continent at large and the entire world, has to be written in close contact with Ukrainians. And it's our duty to provide an opportunity for that kind of knowledge that is not extractivist, that is produced within the country and from within this historic rupture that is recognized globally.
Documenting those stories is justice. And of course, telling those stories back to the rest of the world is also a form of the justice. And I'm actually happy that you mentioned this word erasure, cultural erasure. If I remember correctly, our conversation from 3 years ago, we were talking about Ukrainian female cultural icons like Lesia Ukrainka and others, and how even within Ukraine, we didn't know fully their history and what they represented because so much cultural erasure happened, that so much was served back to us in such a misshaped and horrible way. And we, bits by bits, we need to uncover that story and that history for even ourselves. And this is then extended to so much of, just in the recent 3 years. For me, for example, personally, learning more about what was erased, Ukrainian cultural icons like Malevich, who were stolen and appropriated by Russia and presented to the rest of the world still to this very day as something Russian. So I'm absolutely in awe of the work you're trying to do. I wish, of course, institutions like these existed before in our history, so at least we don't have to do that retroactively, that job, that we are forced to do it even for ourselves today, as well as the Ukrainians.
And you both actually touched on a subject that I wanted to talk about, which is justice. A big part, of course, of what Index and you yourself in your personal work have set out to do is, in one form or shape, to achieve some form of justice for what is happening in Ukraine. And I think in recent years, particularly in the past year, all discussions in Ukraine have been so dominated by discussions of peace and conditions and all of these sort of things that we've heard in the media, that a lot of the time the subject of justice becomes not forgotten, but it kind of is relegated to a secondary topic of discussion, which maybe is correct, maybe it isn't. But I think it's a very important topic that more and more Ukrainians have been thinking about. What does it actually mean? What is justice for us? Is it just something that is achieved in courts, or is it something that is much wider and much more encompassing and collective? And I just wanted to ask you, what does justice mean to you, Sasha?
Easy questions, small topics. We're all about it. Maksym has touched upon it by saying that documenting these stories is a form of justice. And I think I subscribe to this view. Obviously, we all want to see the perpetrators of war crimes in Ukraine in jail, and we all want to see just horrid decisions. But the reality is such that the sheer scope of war crimes that we are living through and that we are witnessing and that we are documenting leaves us, with a question whether international justice system is capable of dealing with it. And while we are documenting these stories, we constantly come to face people who have lost so much and for each of them, justice means something different. For someone, it might be nothing but like put in jail. For some other people, the story of their loved ones told truthfully, who have suffered a great deal from Russian invaders, their stories captured and told truthfully to the world is also a form of justice. I'm thinking here about one of the projects that Index participates in. It's the monitoring of cultural losses, which is called Killed by Russia. It's led by Ukrainian PEN Ukraine, and 6 other institutions, including Index. And it contains the figure of culture makers, librarians, photographers, artists, writers, historians, you name it, who have been killed since the full-scale invasion. This figure is verified. We make sure that every name is correct, that we contact families, we contact relatives, we verify all the information that is possible to verify. And obviously, the figure that we have on this monitoring is not complete. Unfortunately, we do not have access to the occupied territories of Ukraine, where the atrocities that are most cruel are usually taking place. We know it from the experience of the deoccupied areas where we also work. So the figure is not complete, and the figure is very conservative, and currently this figure is 235 culture makers. This is something about erasure. And among those culture makers killed by Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, one of the names is that of Victoria Amelina, a Ukrainian writer who, during the full-scale invasion, started working as a war crimes researcher with a Ukrainian initiative Truth Hounds. And in 2023, during a trip to Kramatorsk in the east of Ukraine, in the Donetsk region, she was killed as a result of a Russian Iskander attack on a restaurant. Victoria left one of her major works, her nonfiction book, Looking at Women, Looking at War, unfinished at the time of her death. And I was privileged to work as part of an editorial group, which also included Tetiana Teren, Irina Grusha, and Alex Amelin. With these people, we've put together the drafts, the notes, the transcripts, and made this unfinished manuscript, shaped it in a way that currently is available. It has been published, it has been awarded Orwell Prize for Political Writing. And one of the main sort of points that Victoria made in this book, which has a very subheading, A War and Justice Diary, is that a story told truthfully is a form of justice for many people. And the fact that her work capturing those stories and also capturing her own story has been published and has been so widely and so highly acclaimed, I think is a form of justice. And this is something that we, with our expertise and with our skills, can do and will be doing in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm also grateful to you for involving me in that project and allowing me to also write about two different people from the region where my family is from, who were also killed by Russia. Both of them worked as directors of two local museums. And I remember texting you after finishing writing about these incredible people. I spent some time with their families and I spoke to them and to the mother and uncle. And I spent time, trying to document the stories of people who would have otherwise just been erased. And I think I texted you and said that this has been probably the thing that I feel has been the most impactful and rewarding from all of the work that I've done, even though it's one story of one individual from one place in one region of Ukraine. But it just really felt like that sense of justice was present somehow in this work that we did. And so I think it's just so important that you are keeping this project going and this work going through both your work, but also a lot of the personal things that you do, because I really think that documenting stories, whether that is our own or somebody else's, those who are alive or those who have been killed, is just something that can bring us just a little bit closer to justice.
During my book shows and lectures, I often quote Victoria Amelina, and she also left maybe several months before her murder this very powerful essay on cultural erasure that is happening in Ukraine. And one of the quotes was about that the imperial manuscripts do not burn, but Ukrainians unfortunately do burn. And that was her way to warn the world about the nature of the war that is happening in Ukraine, which is often still escapes lots of foreigners. They don't understand that this war and the goal of this war and genocide is for Russia to completely erase Ukrainian identity, completely erase Ukrainian culture, to wipe off the map the country and the culture there existed. And I want to come back to the quote from your first appearance on our show.
Ukrainians know too well that the bloodshed would never stop if Russians are allowed to dominate this place. We learn from history and from experience of the last 8 years in the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk and in the occupied Crimea that Russian rule in those territories means deportations, means repressions, means cultural centers turned into concentration camps. This is not something that we will stand by. And the only goal for Ukrainians these days is victory.
Sasha, I wanted to ask you whether in this last 3 years, your vision for what it means, just victory, has changed in any way? Or do you think that the more people or less people subscribe to this Ukrainian idea of what it means to deliver victory in Ukraine?
Thank you for this quote. Again, I would say that it still rings true. And I would also emphasize that the current genocide in Ukraine is empowered by the impunity that has been served to Russia. It's impunity for the colonial wars and war crimes that unfolded even in this past 30 years. Like, we should not forget that it was not just Ukraine. It was Georgia in 2008. It was Ichkeria during the two Chechen wars. And it was also Transnistria, and it was South Ossetia, and it was Abkhazia. I don't have to remind you of this, Maksym, because you obviously wrote this fantastic handbook of Russian imperialism that we all go back to check our notes. It is the Russian impunity for these crimes that enabled the current war in Ukraine. And we should not forget that it also spreads beyond that. Russia has been active in Syria. Like, I don't have to remind you about all of this. And the sooner the world comes to terms with this reality, and the sooner we realize that it is not too optimistic to demand Ukrainian victory and justice for Russia's crimes. It is realistic if we want to survive. It is realistic if we want to live in a just system with a functioning international law. It is realistic if we want to enjoy life under democracy, whatever it means under current circumstances, to demand justice for Russia's war crimes. And I would not agree to anything less. And it is responsibility for people who have fought for Ukrainian victory and who have lost their lives in this fight. It is responsibility for people who have fought for this victory and lost their health or their loved ones that will keep me going and that will keep others in Ukraine going, whether we are supported by our partners outside of the country or not.
Sasha, a lot of the people that listen to our podcast, there's a lot of Ukraine supporters, but there's a lot of also Ukrainians who live all over the world. And we've spoken about this a lot, but we also have sort of written about this a lot in different forms and for different places, which is this concept and feeling of in-betweenness. To me, you know, at one point, the solution to this in-betweenness seemed like moving back to Ukraine. I felt really torn between living abroad and constantly traveling back home. And I thought that, you know, in order to be able to fully sort of decolonize my mind and to fully embrace one side of who I am, the Ukrainian side that for such a long time was erased, I wanted to move back. And of course, you have fully moved back. And as Maksym said in the very beginning, are fully building your life there. And I just wanted to ask you how you felt about this in-betweenness that so many of us have described at different points over the past 3 years, but also decades before that.
I think that the work of translation that you are doing is vital, and we need translators, we need mediators, not in the terms of peace negotiations, but in terms of being a medium for other people who should find a way to relate to Ukrainian reality. This work is vital and it must be done, and I'm very grateful that you're doing it. For me, perhaps currently the in-betweenness relates to something else, to something different. It's being in between civilian and military life in Ukraine, because so many of my friends have enlisted in the army, and so many of my friends are thinking about taking up arms. I think that this in-between status will be resolved in one way or another, or maybe not. But the thing that I try to keep in mind is actually something that great Ukrainian film director and artist Mstislav Chernov said during the Q&A after the screening of his film 2000 Meters to Andriivka here in Lviv. I asked Mstislav about precisely this. His film has an English language voiceover. And this is clear to me that Mstislav addresses a foreign audience with this cinematic text. But it has been shown here inside the country in Lviv. And what kind of work is it doing for the home audience, so to speak? It's a brutal film and a very honest film and a very necessary film for us to understand the kind of life that people who have taken up arms live now. Mstislav said that one type of work that this film is involved in is the work of memory, because it captures the names of those whom we have lost even during the duration of this movie, during the duration of this mission to liberate the Ukrainian village of Andriivka. So the work of memory, remembering names. Remembering the names and the stories and the faces of those who have sacrificed their lives on this path of 2,000 meters. And the second thing that he has mentioned was more revealing to me. He said that we should try to grasp that this war that feels absolutely unbearable, which we continue nevertheless to bear, that this war might last for our entire lifetime. And you sit with this thought and you try to, not to shield yourself from it, but to grasp it as a reality. And then you act based on this reflection. And whatever you do will define the rest of your life. And if you actually are truthful in your actions and in your reflection, we might actually have a chance to preserve our country.
Sasha, I wanted to ask you about your own decolonization journey, because 3 years ago when we talked, you, in one of your quotes, you made it explicitly clear that being Ukrainian was a choice for you, especially coming from the region we're both coming from, where there's been a lot of identity erasure, where there's been a lot of Russification, a lot of lost roots, or even, figuring out who we are, where we come from. And you then wrote a couple absolutely astounding and powerful things documenting your own decolonization journey, specifically what it means to you or meant at the moment regarding the language, regarding the self-identification. When you moved back to Ukraine, did that journey change in any way? I suspect it's still ongoing, but did it help to you to power it up in some ways, or maybe change the direction in some ways? Would you mind sharing with us if you're comfortable doing so?
Okay, so the thing is, and I think this is something that both of you will appreciate, when you're outside of the country, you're constantly fighting, and you're constantly arguing, and you're constantly explaining yourselves. We explain ourselves to people who are coming from a completely different context, and that's what it's only to be expected. People are not supposed to know your context or appreciate it like naturally and organically, especially taking into account the history of Eurasia we've been talking about. When you come back to the country you are originally from, there is a sense of relief that finally you're on the same page with the people around you, and you don't have to fight about the basics. You don't have to sort of fortify the pillars of your identity. There is some base ground understanding of the validity of Ukrainian fight for survival, the importance of Ukrainian resistance, the importance of decolonization, the choices you make regarding language and so on and so forth. So that has been a big relief. But as time passes by, obviously, other nuances emerge, and you start seeing people inside the country not as a unity, not as some uniform mass, but actually people with diverse backgrounds and experiences with whom you also have to come to a common ground. And there are some still very painful questions unresolved inside Ukraine among Ukrainians. But I think that the fact that we are still raising these questions, and there are still contradictions between various experiences, between experiences of those, for example, who are coming from territories that are currently occupied and those who do not know what is occupation, who come from the territories that have been Russified and those who have not experienced this but have been under another kind of imperial pressure. Those contradictions emerge and they're quite painful, but the fact that we are able to discuss them in public, in a public space, is for me a sign of a healthy democracy in spite of the wartime limitations on some democratic freedoms of expression.
Sasha, we asked you also to do something that we'll be asking all of our guests this season to do, which is to write a letter to yourself, to Sasha from 2022, that so many of our listeners learned a lot of things from, not just in that episode, but beyond as well. And I was just wondering if you would be able to share that with us today.
Dear Sasha, greetings from your country at war. Here nothing stays the same for long. All things are always changing. Cities turn into rubble, forests turn into deserts with tree trunks sticking out of the battle-hardened earth like missiles. Missiles stick out of it too. They also turn up as table legs in bars all around the country. Bar owners on prosthetic legs paint them over with their unit's coats of arms. The paintings might turn you into stone. My favorite coat of arms is a Medusa with a shield. My favorite motto is, "Don't give up your weapons." Appropriate for a country that suffered a nuclear disarmament in exchange for security guarantees only to be invaded by one of the guarantors, don't you think? People too change form and reveal their substance. Remember how King Lycaon, who served Jupiter a feast of human flesh, was turned into an ever-hungry wolf? How Arachne, the proud weaver, was changed into a spider? Transformations are revealing. You will be transformed as well. To the outsiders, you'll appear a bit unbalanced. Perhaps it's because half of your heart is missing. But you'll keep going, you'll work with one remaining half as if on speed, and the only drug keeping you afloat will remain the same: love. You will experience betrayal after betrayal, disappointment after disappointment, and loss after loss. But you will not betray your country's fight, you will not be disappointed by your people, and you will not lose faith in Ukrainian victory. No pasaran. See you on the other side. From your beloved Ukraine, faithfully yours, Sasha.
Oh, wow. Why would in any circumstances you would think this is cringe? It's just like
I'm a drama
queen.
I think we should only invite writers from now on, just for the point of it. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you for asking me to reflect on this. It's been important.
I think I definitely know that your 2022 self will definitely appreciate this, would appreciate this. Of all the conversation from today, my takeaway that I probably already knew, but been reinforced. That I remember that 3 years ago, maybe you didn't know what you're going to do. And you were, as you said, you were high on adrenaline and you were really maybe just figuring out what you can actually do to contribute to Ukraine's victory. But you had a very clear understanding of what is happening, and you had very clear signals and alerts and messages that you were sending out to the rest of the world. What is happening, what to do with, how to stop it. And I wish people 3 years ago listened to Ukrainians more. And if anything, this episode, I hope that's another testament to a simple, very simple strategy that anyone who wants to help to Ukraine or trying to figure out how to do it, just listen to Ukrainians. They already knew all the answers 3 years ago, what to do next. And they're definitely even more so sure how to end this when we speak to them today.
Thank you, friends. No pasaran.
This episode was sound directed and mixed by Любов Hook, produced by Fedor Papadyuk and Alina Polyakova of the Ukrainska Pravda. Lucy Lemenchuk of the Shape a Change Agency helped us to make each episode happen as line producer. Maria Kinovich and Valeria Ganicheva created the visual identity for this season. The show was created, narrated, and hosted by Val Vashevska-Khan and Maksym Val. Ukrainian Spaces is made possible by a worldwide network of Ukrainian Spaces sponsors and supporters. You allowed us to create 80-plus episodes over 3 years and to amass tens of thousands of listens for unfiltered Ukrainian stories you won't hear anywhere else. More importantly, you support and elevate Ukrainian voices at their darkest hour, ensuring they're never erased. If you want to join us on this mission, please check out ukrainianspaces.com and pravda.com.ua to learn how to support us.